Whoa, what is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. Super pumped up to be starting this series. I'm going to have the football grump on a lot. We're going to be talking about a lot of different scenarios for the New York Giants. Today, we're going to be going over day one cornerbacks, being that is a huge need right now for this football team, especially when you look at the strength of this draft. A lot of the top prospects are going to be corners. We know, and we're going to talk briefly about free agency in a minute. We know the Giants haven't addressed that position yet. So you have to figure there's a very high probability that we could be going corner day one, but we'll do wide receiver day one. We'll probably do like a miscellaneous day one prospects where we talk about everything but the wide receiver in the corner, because there's certainly some other options out there as well, whether it be the center or the linebacker, and several other positions that we'll talk about on another day. But today we're going to dive into the corners. But first off, Football Grump, thanks for coming on. How you doing, my man?
It's St. Patrick's Day. I don't know when this episode's gonna go out, but I don't know what you're doing. You're drinking coffee. You're wearing red. You're wearing blue. I got a green shirt on. I got a Budweiser. I'm ready to go, man.
I'm super excited to have you on, man. Great guy. I've had him on the channel before. Got to meet him at Giants games, and he loves breaking down film. So I wanted to get a perspective on the channel from a guy that really takes a deep dive into these prospects. Of course, you were at the Senior Bowl day with Bobby and Justin, so I really wanted to get some input from you, a guy that really looks at these guys, and educate myself and educate hopefully people who frequently watch the channel. So thanks for coming on. But first, before we even jump into the prospects, I think we got to start with free agency and how it set us up, because now I think we have a pretty clear view as to where we're probably going to be leaning in this draft in terms of what the needs are after what we accomplished in free agency. And real quick to go down the moves, if you're living under a rock, Darren Waller, we make the trade, we get who's going to be the number one option this year. Obviously, we had Paris Campbell. I like that move. I think he fits the offense relatively well. He's kind of, you can maneuver him both inside and out. He's got really good speed. So I think he was a good fit. We bring back Darius Slayton. Obviously, we finally had a middle linebacker. Thank God. And that's not going to be a huge need at the top of this draft. Now, I'm really excited about him. Still learning how to pronunciate his name. I think it's Bobby Okereke, but really excited about that prospect. But yeah, I wanted to get just your quick thought of what the Giants did in free agency and how it kind of set us up for the draft.
I think what they did was a masterclass of free agency, given the amount of space that they have, where they are as an organization, and where Joe Schoen is as a GM here. The most important thing here is that while there might be a splash trade or a splash signing with, Darren Waller or Bobby Okereke, the most important thing when you take a step back and you really look at what he's done is he set himself up for the most important part of building a roster. I think this is a general consensus, but if not, it's my opinion, is building through the draft. And the best way to do that is to not force yourself to have to draft a player at a position that's not the best value for the pick that you have. So the best way to do that is to use free agency to give you as much flexibility as possible. They had needs all over the place prior to free agency. And they have filled those needs in varying, amounts and values with various assets. But it puts them in a position now where they are not stuck having to pick a particular position right away. There are glaring needs. I'm not going to be someone to argue that corner isn't a glaring need. Wide receiver still is a need. Offensive line, especially in the interior, still a need. But none of those things, it's not so important now, especially when you get, like you said, a Mike linebacker. That's, I would say, off the board for day one and almost off the board for day two at this point.
Yeah. So, and I would have said, honestly, before we made that move, that was our biggest need.
I would agree with that.
Everybody likes to point at the wide receiver, as they should. Our wide receiving core still has a lot more that we need. But we literally did not have a starting linebacker, an NFL starting linebacker on our roster before we made that move. So a move like that just changes everything so much. Had we not gotten a legitimate starting middle linebacker, Shane would have been forced to take one, if not in the first round, probably the second.
And that's kind of how it goes, right? Because I even if we didn't address the wide receiver position, it's the scheme helps a wide receiver who may be lacking in a skill set here or there. You can fudge the scheme to make them effective still. You can't really do that too much with a Mike linebacker, at least in my opinion. I mean, you're kind of screwed. It's too important a position. There's too much responsibility thrown on them between coverage and run defense. You're right. I think they would have had to pick round 1 or round 2. And that sucks to be stuck in that position because that's how teams jump you and, stuff like that. Or you just reach.
Yeah, exactly. And now the position that I think you could at least argue that we need to take, it's good news. You know why? We're going to talk about the prospects, but this draft is loaded with day one cornerbacks. And there's only so many teams that are going to take them because teams need to take quarterbacks. Teams need to take tackles. I guarantee you, Grump, we're going to go over 8 corners in this video. There's probably going to be at least 3 or 4 there for the picking for the Giants at 25. There's probably going to be maybe 3 or 4 corners off the board when we pick. So they're going to have a good opportunity to snag one of these guys and fill what is a huge pressing need. Because I think a lot of people, when they look at the Giants roster, they just think for the here and now. They just think for 2023. They don't think about when Adoree Jackson is more than likely going to be off this team the following year. And then who do you got? So I think the Giants have to think not just this year, but 2024, 2025. And even thinking just this year, we still definitely need a cornerback opposite Adoree Jackson.
Yeah, and that's probably the biggest failing of like a fan's perspective of the offseason. And it's an easy trap to fall into because free agency oftentimes does dictate your here and now, and the draft doesn't always. And so, the trade for Darren Waller does not eliminate them drafting a tight end, for instance. It doesn't. It does not. It probably takes it, off the board for day one, whatever, but they are still very much going to be interested in whatever tight ends are available every time that they are on the clock. And that is because like this free agency was set up so they're not really stuck on a long term with anybody. I mean, who is the one that they are stuck with the longest now? It's
DJ.
Yeah, and even that has an out after 2 years.
Yeah, I think it'll be 3, just based off of the bonuses that he's probably going to get, which I'm completely fine with. You give DJ 3 years, you give Shane an opportunity for 3 years to build up this team. So, and I agree with everything that you said. You build through the draft, and that's clearly what Shane did. He used free agency the way that it's intended to be used. Unlike Dave Gettleman, he used free agency to try to find core pieces like Nate Solder. He spent premium bucks. Kenny Golladay spent premium bucks. Shane is using these guys as, I said it in my video today. He's using a lot of these signings as kind of like, when you go, have you ever been on a cruise, Football Grump?
I actually have not, but
okay. So I have. And when you go on a cruise, you kind of get to sample each destination. So I went on like a Mediterranean cruise. I went to Egypt. I went to Spain. I went to Turkey. And you spent a day at each location, right? That's kind of what he's doing with these free agents. Like Paris Campbell is a day excursion to Spain. And if he likes him, he'll go back on a 4-day vacation. That's kind of how he's operating for agency. That's the way I look at it. It's kind of like a cruise. You get a little sample of each of these guys. And if they fit from within the building and you feel like you want to keep them for a couple more years, 2 or 3 years, you give them an extension. And that's the way he's doing this. He's filling some holes to be able to build the core of his team through the draft.
So for those of us who are fat asses and don't go on cruises, I'll say it's like a deli counter where you can just kind of ask them, can I taste the smoked one? Yeah. And then if you like it, you can buy a pound of it if you want, but you don't have to.
Exactly. That's Paris Campbell. That's Darius Slayton. That's Pollard. That's all the guys that they've brought in. They're committing to them for a year, and then they'll take it from there. They'll see how they do this year. But that's the right approach.
I agree.
Which is going to turn me, Grump, to this draft. I am so pumped up to really start talking about the draft on my channel because I've kind of been putting it off. I've kind of been waiting for free agency to get over because to me, it's fun to talk about, especially if you're like a huge draft guy like yourself. It's fun to talk about it, to get to know the prospects, to do a way too early mock draft. But this is where it gets fun for me, when you really get to see how the team has now been built up to this point. You use free agency as that building block to set yourself up for the draft. Now Shane set himself up for the draft. I'm looking at 3 core needs going into this draft early on. That is the position we're going to talk about today. That's the position we're going to talk about tomorrow whenever we do our next one at wide receiver. And that's the position in the middle on the offensive line. It's wide receiver, corner, and it's a center. Those are the 3 obvious needs for this team going into the draft. But we're going to jump into corner. And before we go over these prospects, I thought it was pretty important to kind of go over some like successful man press cover corners that play from within the NFL. Because that's the scheme we run. We're looking for guys that could fit Wink's scheme.
Let me just jump in really quickly here. as a personal preference, me, and I think I've said this before, whatever, but I like to purchase corners if at all possible. So like I really liked the Adoree Jackson deal. And the reason why is because it's one of the hardest positions. There are, if you go through the history of the NFL draft, there are a ton of bust first
Jeff
round
Okudah
and
comes to mind right off the bat.
right off the bat, right? The kid that Blackman, is that
Yeah.
somebody? That's
DeAndre
the
Baker,
Jackson.
do we need to remind ourselves about him?
There are tons, man. There's tons. So for me, and I think a lot of it has to do with confidence and forcing those guys to have to play right away when maybe the college program they did not have them prepared for the NFL properly or whatever the case is. Me personally, I love purchasing free agent corners. That's clearly not going to happen this year. We don't have the money. There aren't the guys on the market, etc. So when you have to draft, the best way to do it is to compare it to the best guys you wish you could purchase, right? That makes the sense.
Kind of wish Sauce Gardner fell to us last year. As much as I love Kayvon Thibodeau, I love Kayvon. He's going to be a beast. He is a beast. Sauce Gardner already arguably the best cornerback in football.
That's insane too. Be a first year All Pro. That's insane.
That is, I would say, the three hardest positions to transition to into the NFL are quarterback, cornerback, and offensive tackle. Those three positions. So for him to be the best in the sport,
I know.
year one, that's like one of these quarterbacks this year, Will Levis, coming into the pros this year and being the number one quarterback in football. That's unheard of. It's ridiculous.
It really is crazy. Because when you think about it, Patrick Mahomes didn't even play much his first year.
Yeah, he played the last game of the year.
And he's currently the best quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah, exactly. And he was probably the best quarterback his second year. He was a freak of nature, but so is Sauce Gardner.
Yeah.
And that's the first guy we're going to talk about when we talk about measurements, because he's a guy that I think would fit our scheme. It's why a lot of Giants fans wanted him last year. It's why it was rumored that the Giants were very interested in him. And the first thing that pops out of me with Sauce Gardner, I mean, he's just a physical freak. He's 6'3", which is important for a corner, right? Like, I'm not going to say it's like the be-all, end-all. There's tons of great corners, and we're going to go over one of them here that's sub 6 foot. But it's nice to have a cornerback that is fast, that is strong, that is physical, and that is tall, that could go up against some of these 6'2", 6'3" wide receivers. So he is 6'3", 190. Another thing that you hear a lot of people talk about when they talk about corners, a magic number when it comes to arm length, at least that I've heard countless times. The Seahawks used to say this all the time when they evaluated for the Legion of Boom. They look for guys with arm length over 32 inches. Well, Sauce Gardner, 33.5-inch arms. That is monstrous. And then he ran a 4.4 140, which is very impressive in its own right. So right off the bat, Sauce Gardner just pops off the page in terms of his physical characteristics, in terms of his 40 time, and so on and so forth.
Wow. Took a deep breath and choked on my own spit. So, yeah, I mean, and we talk about the most important, like, combine skill tests or whatever. Obviously, like, arm length, the length in general, it's important for hand-eye coordination, for pass breakups, for frustrating wide receivers that might be a little quicker. You can kind of stay in there and just keep frustrating them along the stems of the route and things. And the 40 is probably the most overhyped combine thing, but for corners, for wide receivers, it's super important. It is not a throwaway thing. So a 4.4 140, that goes a long way. And a bad 40 at the combine, that also goes a long way.
Yeah, especially at this position.
Right. And I would even say the 10-yard split is pretty important when you're dealing with shiftier guys on the release and stuff like that. I mean, if you're getting burned off the release, it doesn't even matter if you can. I mean, I guess it sort of matters if you can catch up, but that's going to be you're playing from behind. I mean,
the initial burst and the catch-up speed, that's important at a cornerback position.
Right, yeah.
Jalen Ramsey, very similar to Sauce, right? We said Sauce was 6'3", 190. Jalen Ramsey was built like a brick shithouse, coming in 6'1", 209. The arm length was nearly identical. We said Sauce was 33.5. Jalen was 33 3/8. And they both ran the same exact 40 time, 4.41 rather. The vert and broad, I don't know if Sauce participated in that. I didn't see that for him, but Jalen Ramsey had a 41.5 on the vert, which we're going to get into some of the prospects in this draft class. Some of them had similar numbers to that, but that's really impressive. And an 11.3 on the broad, which again, a super high number. So there's two guys that really like their measurements popped off, right? Both of them over 33-inch arms, both of them super tall, both of them built big, both of them ran, really good 40 times. So they were like can't miss prospects.
And I would say that they were can't miss prospects that remain probably the number 1 and number 2 best man cover corners in the NFL.
Yeah. I don't think it's a debate at this point. I think those are definitely sauce. Like I would say this, if I exclude quarterbacks, if I was doing a draft today, factoring in age, factoring in positional importance, Sauce is a top 5 pick in the entire league right now.
That's an endorsement.
That's how good he is. And I'll tell you that another guy that's in the top 5, Andrew Thomas, left tackle for the New York Giants.
Oh, that's quite an endorsement.
If we're excluding quarterbacks, I think
that
both
was
of my top 5 picks.
That was my favorite tackle in that draft. So
yeah, tackles are important, man. Blindside protector.
Hey, but that was a weird year for. I mean, there was a legitimate argument for those 4 tackles that year, and Andrew Thomas was my guy.
You know what?
The whole time.
Dave Gettleman was a bad GM, but he got that pick right. There's no doubt about it.
I don't want to get into a thing, but I'll say this: I didn't hate DG's drafts.
I agree. I've
said this
countless times. He was a good scout, a bad GM.
Yeah. And that's what he was. He was a scout before a GM. So
yep, that's how he got the job. It's kind of like Shermer, good OC, bad head coach. Next up, Xavier Howard, 6 foot 201. So again, you're noticing a theme here. Good height, good weight, 201 pounds, 31 1/4 on the arms though. So he's kind of a rare exception. Had maybe average arm length, ran a 4.58 40, which is really mediocre, to put it nicely, for a first-round cornerback prospect. And then he had a 33 on the vert. So to put that in comparison to Jalen Ramsey was 41 1/2. So like Xavier Howard is a prime example of a guy that did not really impress in terms of his physical attributes, did not impress at the combine, yet showed up at the pro level. So there's no perfect science to this.
Xavier Howard is who I was in high school, and that was the kid who did his homework while the teacher was collecting it and still like scraped by with an A-.
I did the same thing, by the way.
Yeah, I didn't deserve it, whatever. But like you go through my I almost had like a 4.0 in college, but that just kind of luck, just natural ability in there. So the combine, it's not a be all end all, but you'll see. We're looking for that thread where you can tell, he is an outlier. So I guess he's kind of the perfect example of don't take the combine 100%. Just kind of take it at 80.
As a tool.
Yeah, exactly.
Next guy we're going to talk about is kind of a tweener for me. Like some of his measurements are really impressive and others are like similar to that of Xavier Howard. That's Jair Alexander. Not ideal height, 5'10". But again, another thing you're going to notice, all these guys that were really successful at the pro level, all these guys that were really highly thought of prospects, high weight, 196, right? That's a good weight for a corner, good physical corner. So he's 5'10", 196, 31 1/8 on the arms. Again, much like Howard, kind of way below average there, or at least mediocre in terms of that, if you're looking at that attribute. But he did run a 4.38 40. He had a 35 on the vert. Again, not great. With a 10.7 on the broad. So a little bit better than Howard, kind of in between that of Howard and Jalen Ramsey. So not like a super prospect coming out.
No, not a super prospect. But like, so I guess the big thing is that most of the height, I would say the weight is important, but the height is, this is 5'10". That's about as low as you kind of want to go at the outside.
First round corner. Yeah.
Yeah. But strictly for the outside, I'm going to separate out what I call DBs. And that's that weird slot / corner / safety position.
Right.
We're not talking about those today. We're talking about outside.
We're talking about the exterior. We're talking about the press corners. Yeah.
And 5'10" is about as low as I'll go. So, I mean, there's a guy we're going to talk about probably, I'll just say his name, like Clark Phillips. He's going to be a day 2 guy for me on that alone.
Yeah. And a lot of people, not so much now, a lot of people early on in the process, like I watched some really early mocks, they had the Giants taking Clark Phillips in the first round, but he's a guy that's kind of slipped back as the draft process has gone along, and that probably has a lot to do with it. So now that we talk about measurements of some of the pro players, we're going to talk about some of the measurements of some of the corners we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about 7 or 8 corners. 6 of them are on this list, that being Cam Smith, that being Emmanuel Forbes, that being Ringo, That being Witherspoon, Christian Gonzalez, and Joey Porter, along with two other names that we're going to bring up throughout the video. Cam Smith, first thing you look at, height, 6 foot, good. Weight, little bit less than some of those guys we just talked about. 180. And the arm length, again, not the best, 31 and 5/8. So in terms of the measurables for Cam Smith, I wouldn't say he jumps off the page. Let's put it that way.
I'd say fringe.
Yeah, fringe.
I mean, like me, I can't tell the difference between 31 and 5/8 and 32. I don't know about you with laser eyes, but
every inch counts though. Just tell the ladies, they know.
But you can't hit me on St. Patty's with a joke like that. It's too good. Yeah, but I would describe his measurements as fringe, right? Like 31 and 5/8, that's basically 32. You can get away with that. You know,
yeah.
What is he? 6 feet, I think you said, right?
Yeah, he was 6 foot, 180.
Yeah. And 180, that's fringe. But
it's
again,
not eye-popping. It's solid metrics, right? Good solid weight, good solid height, decent arm length, but not superpowers. It's not, not superpowers. Next guy we're going to talk about, he's got the height. He's got the arm length, 32 and 1/4, but the weight checks in at 166. That's not where you want to be for a first-round quarterback prospect. And that, of course, is Emmanuel Forbes, who is really impressive. We're going to talk about him more throughout the video, but it's kind of similar to the guy we drafted last year, which I'm completely fine with when it's a late third-round pick. But when you're talking first round, 25th overall, are you really going to just tie yourself to a cornerback who weighs 166 pounds?
Yeah, and 166, that's a number, right? You kind of have to take in weight with, height and arm length and everything else, but just look at him. He looks like a rail. Yeah. And I mean, just picture him on the outside trying to tackle Derrick Henry bouncing one, and you might witness a murder.
Or DK Metcalf, even if you're talking about one-on-one with a physical.
Sure.
Weapon.
Hell, oh my God, DK Metcalf will eat him for breakfast. Yeah. Or at least, here I am saying that in March. But, all of these guys, I would say 100% of the draftable guys, they got to hit the weight room.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's just a fact. But 166 is surprisingly low. In fact, I don't remember the last time I weighed 160.
Me neither. It's been a long time. Way too long. So next guy we're going to go over is Ringo out of Georgia. A guy that a lot of people liked early on. He seems to be dipping a little bit in mocks, but when you look at the measurements, at least the height and the weight, 6'1", 207, plays man press at Georgia. We don't have the best history with Georgia corners. We don't got to talk about DeAndre Baker again. The arm length, though, again, 31 and 1/4 on Ringo out of Georgia, but the height and the weight really do definitely jump out with him.
31 and 1/4, I would say. If that's the only measurement that's off, it would still put him in the fringe, but everything else checks out. I mean, you look at him at that point, if you're going to ignore one measurement, then the film kind of has to
jump out,
bolster that spot. You know what I mean? Like you have to be like, yeah, I see that number, but also like, did you see this highlight? Like he can do this. So, one number is okay, especially when it's close, right? Like that's 3/4 of an inch off from the benchmark that you want. That's not horrible, but it's certainly fringe, right?
Yeah, it's fringe. Next guy we're going to talk about, little bit low on the height, 5'11", solid weight, 181 for a guy who's 5'11", and again, the arm length, not the best, 31 and 1/4. So Devin Witherspoon, but you want to talk about a guy that pops out, and I know you're going to talk about it when we bring him up in terms of the film. He's one of them.
Yeah, I mean, like I definitely take the combine into consideration, but film is like my number one thing for what I think a guy is going to be. Right? It's like I think it's a Patriots saying is, tell me what a guy can do, don't tell me what he can't do.
Yeah.
You turn on the film and that guy's a lightning rod. He loves to come downhill and hit people. He's an easy guy to fall in love with. And I think it's not just me. I think it's NFL teams that really love this guy.
I mean, you've seen a lot of people mocking him to the Eagles at 10. Like he's going early in a lot of these mocks. So,
although, do you think that's still going to happen?
Yeah, we were talking about that right before we filmed the pod, but the Eagles bring back Slay. They bring back Bradbury. So like, yeah, I mean, that's something that you want to look at as a fan too, as you start to develop some of these post, free agency mock drafts. What did other teams do to fill out some of their needs? And maybe, one of these guys like a Witherspoon, who you once had penciled in with no chance to drop to the Giants, suddenly has a possibility too because teams address the cornerback position. So the Eagles being one of them, they brought back two guys who, quite frankly, I thought there was a good chance neither of them would have been back. They ended up bringing back both.
I agree with you.
Yeah. So we'll see about him. Next up, Christian Gonzalez, pretty much the consensus number one corner in this draft. And you see why, at least based off the measurements. 6'1", great height, 197, right where you want to be. And that magic number that we talked about, 32-inch on the arms.
That's like the guy who cheated on his test. Where it's like,
Exactly.
every single answer is perfect, huh? Okay.
Yeah, that's straight A's right there. Speaking of straight A's, 6'2", 193, 34-inch arm length for Joey Porter out of Penn State.
That's the guy who cheated and got the extra credit question right. and his dad's an alum. So that's that guy.
Yeah. And you see, and we're going to talk about some of their production at the collegiate level. Porter didn't have near the production, at least from a statistical standpoint, as some of these other guys. But teams look at that. They look at the physical traits. They look at the physical upside. And he has God-given talents, ability that a lot of coaches may feel like they could get the most out of him, which is why he's being mocked very high.
And also, right, like stats at the college level are not the same as the NFL level. Like, especially when you look at corner, like if there's one good corner on a team, why the hell would you ever throw towards him?
Exactly. So, I don't know if you do IDP in fantasy, like individual defensive players, but like when you do IDP leagues, you always want to draft the bad corners because those are the guys that get the tackles. Those are the guys that get the pass breakups. Because when you got Sauce Gardner, nobody's going to be throwing to Sauce Gardner. They're going to be throwing to the other guy. So yeah,
no way.
Yeah, it's a good point. Next up, we're going to talk about how they did at the combine in terms of the first number is going to be the 40 time. Then you're going to have the 10-yard split, which I personally think is probably even more important than the 40 time because it shows the initial burst and the quick twitch, the quick speed. Then you got the 38-inch, the vertical rather, and then followed by the broad jump. So when we talked about, to put it in context, when we talked about Jalen Ramsey had an 11.3 on the broad. He had 41.5 on the vert. And his 40 time was 4.41. So just to put it into context, you're talking about one of the best corners in the league, if not the best corner in the league. So let's see how these guys measure up from that standpoint. First, we'll talk about Cam Smith. He checks out 4.43. That's a really good, solid 40 time. And the one thing that really stands out to me with him, a really impressive number on that first 10-yard split at 1.49. Anything sub 1.5, really impressive there. He had a 38-inch on the vert and an 11.12 on the broad. Respectable numbers, good numbers for Cam Smith.
I would say nearly identical to Jalen Ramsey.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not far off. I mean, he's faster.
The vert's a little off. He had a 41.5 but 38. The broad jump comparable. I think it was 11.3 to 11.2. And the 4.4. Yeah, so at least comparable to Jalen Ramsey.
Yeah, I would say the vert is the only one that's not, and even that 38, 41.5, that's still, I don't know. 41.5, I feel like is a freakish number. I think 38 is a good number.
Good number, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when you look at it compared to all the other corners on this list, there's only one guy above him, two guys above him, and one guy we're not going to be talking about. Of the high-profile guys, Christian Gonzalez is the only one above him, so definitely a very good vert.
Yeah.
Next go ahead.
Just my minor thing, Cam Smith played at South Carolina, which is just, I don't know. It's one of those programs that's difficult to judge prospects at because it is a good program, good enough to be in the SEC, but it is a clear second class of the SEC, right?
Kind of reminds me of the school that our quarterback went to, second class in the ACC.
I would say Duke might be third class.
Yeah, they may be. They're not even coach on a plane. They're in like the bathroom.
They have like one player drafted in the top in day one and day two, like every 5 years or something like that. Jamison Crowder, I remember before.
Yeah.
DJ, but like there's not a ton of guys coming out of Duke.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's South Carolina. They'll get, Jadeveon Clowney.
Oh, no, it's definitely a much better program, but they're near the back end of that conference. Like
sure. Yeah. So like, his film work might be, I mean, it's just a team is just totally overmatched. He's asked to cover a guy for, an extra 3 seconds more than say Ringo. Right.
Right. Yeah.
So just a thing to keep in mind with Cam Smith.
Yeah. It's a good point you bring up. Next up, we're going to bring up is Emmanuel Forbes. Look at the freaking 40 time for Emmanuel Forbes. Now, he was the guy that didn't have the best physical traits. If we go back to Forbes here, Forbes only weighed in at 166, 6 foot. So that's something to keep an eye on. But long arms, though, 32 1/4, long arms. And then Forbes ran a 4.35, which is the fastest time of at least this list of corners on this list. That is flying. And he had a 1.48, which again is the fastest of any corner on this list, on the 10-yard split. And a very impressive vert as well at 37.5. The broad, not so much. A little lower than a lot of these guys at 10 and 4 inches. But regardless, really impressive combine for Emmanuel Forbes. Certainly helped the stock.
Yeah, and some guys go to like these camps and stuff to train specifically for the combine, but Forbes's speed is something that shows up on film. There's a key highlight that I'm sure it's like probably the number one highlight for Emmanuel Forbes is he jumped like a quick slant or something that Kentucky was running, and he was in the end zone before I think Will Levis even realized what the hell happened. He is so fast, it's not even funny. But you can see I think the concern with him is when you do add some weight, when he adds 15 pounds, is he still a 4.35 corner?
Does he become a 4.43 guy?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point. Next up, we're going to bring up is Ringo. Ringo, again, if we go back to the measurements, impressive, right? 6'1", 207. Arm length, not the best, but really good height, really good weight. Fits this scheme. We'll talk about more throughout the video when we get to him individually. The 40 time off the charts, 4.36. But the other numbers, 1.54. What's interesting here for me when I look at these numbers, the 4.36 is pretty much as high as anybody on this list, but the 10-yard split is one of the lower numbers at 1.54, which is kind of crazy. And then he had only a 33.5 on the vert, which is actually the second lowest number of anybody on this list here, and the lowest of any corner we're going to talk about. And the vert was the lowest as well of any corner we're going to talk about at 10-2. So it's just weird that his 10-yard split, which you could argue may be more important than the 40-yard, dash itself, is among one of the lowest, even though his 40-yard time is really impressive.
And call that long speed, or in corner terms would be recoverability speed. So while he may make a mistake, he has the speed to catch up or correct those mistakes. And I would say at an impressive ass time like 4.36, that even translates to the NFL level. He has recoverability speed. That is to say, if DK Metcalf or I don't know who's a good wide receiver that's not necessarily an NFL blazer like a John Ross, like somebody slower than that but still good.
A non-blazer. We'll throw a name out there. How about Brandon Ayuk? He's not like a blazer.
Sure. Yeah, and exactly. And if Ayuk beats him right off the release,
Debo's a good one. Debo,
perfect. And if he's beat right off that release, he can catch up if it's a wheel route or a go route or any sort of like deep, long developing, not a lot of cuts kind of route. He can catch up, and he's afforded more leeway in those mistakes early on. That's really what that means to me when I see numbers like that.
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah. Because for him to have that 40 time, and I didn't even think about this before we made the video, but when I'm looking at the 10-yard split and I look at his 40 time, like put that in comparison to a guy like Gonzalez, for example. Gonzalez actually they're actually really comparable.
Yep.
Gonzalez, same thing. He's got the great catch-up speed. But if you compare it to Cam Smith much quicker on the 10, but Ringo actually ran a faster 40 time, which is crazy. But the next guy we're going to talk about here, Witherspoon, unfortunately didn't participate. I'm sure he'll run at the pro day, so we don't have anything to go by here. I'm sure he didn't want to hurt his draft stock because he's a film guy. That's where he's going to make his money in the draft this year. Christian Gonzalez, though, I mean, we talk about Christian Gonzalez, how he was the perfect guy. Like, go back and look at the straight A's, right? Christian Gonzalez, 6'1", 197, 32-inch arms, everything you want. Pro over 6'1", right around that 200-pound mark, and the 32-inch arms. Perfect. Grade A, like you said. Combine, same story. The dude runs a 4.38 and only a 1.54 in the 10-yard split, which, again, when you think about it, that catch-up speed, his vert was off the charts. That's Jalen Ramsey-esque we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. That's the exact number that Jalen Ramsey had at 41.5. And the broad jump, almost identical as well. Jalen was 11.3. He's 11.1. 40 time, Gonzalez was actually quicker. He's 4.38 compared to 4.41. The height and weight almost identical coming in. So at least from a physical skill standpoint, height, weight, speed, very comparable to Jalen Ramsey coming into the pros, which is why he's going to be the first corner off the board.
Yeah, and which is why the Dallas Cowboys would rather have Ezekiel Elliott than him, right? But really, I mean,
yeah, you got to throw a Cowboys jab in there,
I
which I
have
love,
to.
which I
Come
love.
on, man. What do you think this is? But even when we talk about the speed, throw that shit back up there. The 154, even when we're comparing it to Cam Smith, we're talking about 5/100ths of a second.
Yeah.
I mean, it's different, and Cam Smith ran it better. Not taking anything away, but I mean, it is not a huge gap between these things. The eye can't tell the difference. So
yeah. Now Joey Porter was probably the most impressive, just based off of his measurements. The tallest of the bunch, 6'2", right around the bulkiest of the bunch at 193, and the longest arms of the bunch. But his combine, I don't want to say underwhelming because they're still impressive numbers, but not eye-popping numbers. Like of Cam Smith, Emmanuel Forbes, Ringo, Witherspoon didn't run, and Gonzalez, he has the slowest 40 time. He had the middle of the pack, I'll say, on the 10-yard split at 1.5. His vert, near the bottom of the pack again. The only guy who had a lower vert, I think, that I'm looking at here was Ringo at 33.5. He was 35. And the broad, same thing. Forbes and Ringo were lower. So again, he's kind of middle of the pack, from a combine standpoint of the bunch.
It's just middle of the pack among the first round guys, I guess
exactly.
you could say. Exactly. I was gonna say these are still stellar numbers.
Still
4.46.
I would love. By the way, I'd love
fast.
any of these guys on the Giants.
Oh
for
yeah,
the most part.
Yeah.
But let's jump into the prospects now. The first guy we're going to talk about is a guy we're not going to take. Let's be real. He's going to be off the board. Just based off of his physical attributes, we were just comparing him to Jalen Ramsey. Everybody has him going inside the top 10, and that's Christian Gonzalez. And when you just dive into his numbers before we talk about, what you see on film off of PFF, and I'm not the biggest PFF guy, but I actually, when I looked at it, I love the breakdown. It shows you the passer rating against, it shows you the touchdowns he gave up, his interceptions, his yards against. 83 overall grade based off their grading system. And keep in mind, you got to go based off conference too. He plays in the Pac-12. So in the Pac-12, like we were talking about before we started filming, everybody throws the ball. Like they air it out in that conference, whether it be USC, whether it be UCLA. Like you watch a Pac-12 game, like they're putting up 50 points. Like it's a lot of offense when you watch a Pac-12 game. So in comparison to the next guy we're going to talk about in the Big Ten, so it's a little bit different. It's kind of apples to oranges. But he gave 495 yards, 39 receptions on 64 targets, 74 passer rating. Very good numbers. Very good numbers. And a guy, like we said, that checks out from all the physical attributes. What did you see on film from Christian Gonzalez?
Not a lot that's bad, I can tell you that. I mean, the dude's an excellent man cover press corner. He absolutely blankets wide receivers. He has the deep speed necessary. He has fluid hip flips. There's some other important things here. We're talking specifically about man cover corners because we have a Wink Martindale system that covets them. But we saw games where Wink wanted to do more zone coverage and it didn't work or whatever. But Wink has shown that he is a little bit more fluid with his scheme on a game-to-game basis. And I don't know if that's just personnel or just the fact that he's also trying to be a head coach at some point in his life. Or maybe it was even just lessons learned from. I'm going
to interject to give my opinion. I really think it was personnel. I think it was personnel more than anything because we didn't have it. We didn't have the guys to be able to do what he wanted to do, and that's why I really think we're going to draft a man press cover corner this year because I think he wants to be a lot more aggressive. If it was up to Wink and we had the pieces, we know how aggressive he wants to be.
Absolutely, yeah. I just think it's important to also look at, like, aside from their man cover skills, off man. If you have a corner that's good at baiting a quarterback into throwing stupid passes, turnovers are the best thing a defense can do, period.
I'll bring up the perfect corner for that. Trayvon Diggs.
There you go. Yeah, and that's absolutely true. As an off man corner, Trayvon Diggs is probably the best in the NFL. And it comes with a lot of gambling. There's a lot of risk there. I mean, there's real lowlights on the internet of Trayvon Diggs trying to cover. I mean, I'm sure as Giants fans, we all know about how Kadarius Toney really kind of smoked the shit out of him. But Christian Gonzalez, his off-man coverage is good. He has nice cushion. His closing speed is pretty good. He's able to close that gap, and at least at the Pac-12 level or the Pac-1 or whatever, how many teams are left in it now starting this year.
Yeah.
I would say the only thing that's like a downside for him, and this is real low in the list, but it's important to me, and I think it's important for a Wink Martindale system, a man cover system, is playing the run. Because if there's going to be any sort of like jet motion or anything like that, the wide receiver you're covering, you have to recognize it for starters, and you have to be able to shed blocks and set the edge, and you have to be able at least to have a good enough tackle to slow him down for help to get there.
We saw it this year. You know,
Sure.
Adoree Jackson, for example, got a lot more physical than he ever was before Wink got there. They asked him to be much more physical up at the line of scrimmage. So, yeah, it's a good point you bring up in terms of being able to guard against the run at that position in Wink's defense.
Right. And just from what I saw on film at Oregon, which, again, that's not indicative of everything in the entire universe because you're relegated to what you play at and the competition you play against. He's just a decent form tackler that lacks strength. I think his tackling in the open field is shoddy-ish. I think that's probably his biggest area of improvement. But I mean, of all the things to worry about in the draft for a man cover corner, that's really low on the list.
You know,
I got to find something to shit on.
You know, it was a really bad tackler too at his position, Deion Sanders, but he was a pretty good player.
That's a damn good point you bring up there. It's also a completely different era. So
of course. No, I agree with you. That's something you definitely want to consider. Maybe it's a little nitpicky, but that's what we're about. We're trying to find weaknesses in all these guys. And
it's just you want to know who you're getting in bed with.
Exactly.
So you got to know all the little things.
And if we're going to get in bed with this guy, I'd be pretty happy. Next corner up is Joey Porter. We talked about his measurables, 6'2", super long arms, 34 inches. People love this guy. And I think they love this guy because of his upside more so than his film, which I'm very excited to get into the film with you. What you saw when you watched his tape. When you look at the numbers, I'm like, how the hell did he only get a 73 grade? It has to be based off of coverage because the guy only gave up 143 yards of coverage. He held quarterbacks to a 63 rating. Granted, in the Big Ten, where you don't have the greatest quarterbacks in college football, but the numbers, I mean, my God, 275 coverage snaps. He only gave up 15 receptions all year. That's incredible.
Joey Porter is a really good player. And I don't even call him Junior. I just call him Joey Porter. I would say, like, the reason he probably has a low grade, and I don't know because I don't really like PFF's. I don't understand their metrics enough to get the grade. But I would say the thing that probably drags him below other people is just stats, production, etc. Teams don't really like to throw against him, but even when they did, he just doesn't have. There are guys that have natural ball hawking abilities. They have good ball skills, and when things are happening around them, it just seems to land in their hands for whatever reason.
Never knows for the ball.
And he's just not one of those guys. You saw it all the time. He would even bat it down and the receiver would still catch it or something. Luck never really falls his way. And that's probably why he's got that weird lower PFF grade. To me, that's not really my biggest concern. You know what? If every single throw towards Joey Porter is a pass breakup and not an interception, I can live with that. Yeah, my biggest thing with him is his grabbiness. And he is grabby. In my opinion, at the Big Ten level, he should have been penalized more than he was, and he was penalized kind of a lot. I don't know how that's going to translate. I don't know how coachable that kind of thing is, but it's the only real knock I can slam on him that's just 100% his fault is he's a grabby dude. I know... I'm pretty sure Bobby Skinner put out like a tweet about that and the differences between a guy who's grabby when he gets beat and a guy who's just physical all the time. And that being the difference with Joey Porter. That's probably true. I don't know how officials really look at things at the NFL level. I don't. And it seems like every year there's a new standard. So I don't know.
Well, now they're going to review them, right? Oh, no. I'm sorry. No, it's not pass interference. It's roughing the passers. They got rid of the pass interference reviews. Which they never overturned, by the way. That was a stupid.
Yeah, that was a 1 year thing to placate New Orleans.
Yeah, because of the New Orleans game. Yeah, but
so that's I don't blame them.
So that's the knock on Porter for you. You think he's a guy that's a little too handsy, a little too grabby, and good chance he'll be called for a lot of PIs at the NFL level. That's something you certainly got to worry about.
I don't know that it goes that far. It's something that you can't ignore. It's right in front of you. It's easy to see. You watch 2 straight games, and you're like, oh, that just kind of happens all the time, huh?
Yeah.
And then my thing really is that I just don't know how how easy it is to coach that out. I know, was it Patrick Graham that put tennis balls in their hands?
Yes. Yes.
So, I mean, maybe it is not that big a deal, but if I have to pick something, that would be it for him.
Okay. I like it. I like it. Next guy we're going to talk about, huge. It seems like you were a huge fan too before we started filming, and that's Witherspoon coming out of Illinois. You look at his numbers. Again, Big Ten, so same conference as the last guy we talked about with Porter. Look at his grade. And again, I don't even know how they measure this. Look at the passer rating. 25. The guy gave up 206 passing yards, didn't give up a touchdown all year, 3 interceptions, a 92 grade, 738 defensive snaps, 424 coverage snaps, only gave up 22 catches all year for 206 yards. The numbers are eye-popping for Witherspoon.
This dude, to me, he's the number 2 corner in this draft, in my opinion. I understand that, his measurables are not the elite traits that you normally think, but damn, is his film good. I mean, it is. And remember, we're talking about, I know it's a good defense out there, and they had an NFL coach be their head coach and recruiter for quite a while, but it's Illinois we're talking about. Joey Porter at least was playing at Penn State. That's a huge program. Yeah. Illinois, not really known for their NFL talent.
School, to be honest with you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this dude, he's physical along the route to frustrate wide receivers, but without being too grabby, which is, I would assume, difficult to do and difficult to teach. We don't see a lot of that. He's got the speed. He's got the long speed. He's smart. More than anything, when I look at players, and it doesn't even matter the position. So, as we do these videos going through the draft or whatever, I'm probably going to mention this like 100 times. There are guys that just see and go. You know what I mean? And even if they're wrong, if they see and go and they're just like, they make a decision and they're going to go 100%, I would rather have that and have them be wrong than have a guy who's got to think for the extra second about what he wants to do. Because the NFL, you don't have that extra second. You might as well go and miss. You know what I mean? But if you are right, you're going to be that guy on SportsCenter.
You're going to make the game winning play.
Exactly. You're going to be doing snow angels on the field.
Right.
And this is the dude to me. Obviously Christian Gonzalez is the Jalen Ramsey of this draft. He's got the measurables, the film, and the combine. This dude doesn't have the measurables, but he's got the film and he's got a pretty damn good combine. Great hand-eye coordination, really good timing. For his height, he's able to high point stuff. He's able to play those contested catches. He's physical. He's a dog, dude. Like, he wants to fight people. So I want that in a corner. I love this.
And I think Wink would want that too.
I think the big problem is that everybody else wants him to.
Yeah. He definitely seems like he's going in the first half of the first round. But hey, you never know. It's crazy.
No, that's why you do all this stuff.
Yeah, people drop year to year. So, like, would I be beyond shocked on draft night if he falls to 25? I wouldn't, because I could at least see arguments to be made for somebody preferring a guy like Deonte Banks.
Or just going on a run on tackles or a run on wide receivers or whatever.
Yeah, which is going to bring us to our next corner. And that is the guy that probably helped his draft stock more so than any other corner, at least in my opinion, at the combine. He jumped off the page. His 40 time was off the charts. He's got all the measurables like we talked about earlier. He run like a 4.35. I mean, my goodness. He's pretty tall. He's got pretty long arms, if I recall. These are his numbers while at Maryland. Take it for what you will. 72 grade, had a passer rating of 71.4 against, gave up 4 touchdowns, 1 interception, 26 catches, 258 yards. So solid numbers, not like Witherspoon, who look at those stats. 0 touchdowns, 206 yards, 25 pass rating. So not like that.
At Illinois. 0 touchdowns, plays Ohio State.
If you're in love with Banks, if you're one of these teams, I think it's based off of his upside, not so much his production. You're looking at his 40 time, you're looking at his quick speed, the 10-yard split, his measurements. That's what you're looking at and what he could potentially be. But from a production standpoint, he doesn't measure up with some of these other guys we've already talked about.
And again, this is a Big Ten guy that plays at one of the back half schools, right? Maryland has some draft talent this year. More than just him. They have a couple of tackles. They got some wide receivers. I mean, is it Tua's brother or cousin is the quarterback there?
Yes. Yeah, Maryland, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, but real quick, give me his 40 time.
Yeah, let's go back. Let's take a quick look.
Just read it off to me. I'm gonna hit you with how he ranks among DBs. The 40
He
time
had
is
where is he? Deontay Banks. Actually, he wasn't on there, but he did run a 4.35. I know that.
he ran a
before.
4.35. That was tied for third among DBs. His 10-yard split was 1.49. That was tied for seventh. The best was 1.47, so 0.02 seconds.
Yeah.
His vertical 42. That was the best among DBs. His broad 11.4. That was second among DBs.
Yeah,
He blew the combine out of the water.
And he's going to go up because of it. We saw a guy go first overall last year because of the combine.
Right. And so if you want my film analysis of him, it's real. This is one of those guys that's going to be difficult because corner is a tough position to film work on when you have a team with like some talent, but they're in a really good conference. And it's just like, why throw at Banks? But also like he's got no help. There's no pass rush.
Yeah.
You're kind of going more on upside than film. You're kind of looking for traits on film rather than production. Sorry, I have a cat. He's walking in front of the camera.
He's a traits guy. He's not a production guy, at least as of now, at this point. But I mean, like you said, the physical attributes for him, number one in several categories, or at least top 2 or 3 in several categories at the combine. So,
and you know what? Someone's going to take a chance on those traits, and I'm not ruling us out. Not at all.
If you would ask me right now, if I was doing a mock draft today, I think he's my favorite. Not my favorite guy to get, but if you're asking me who's the most likely guy that's a Giant on draft day, I think I'm going Banks. That would be my pick today.
I think that there's a pretty decent probability that you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, but we'll find out. We'll find out in a little over a month. That's why we got to go over all these guys. Next guy we're going over is Ringo, who ironically was the guy I had going in my first mock draft, my way too early mock draft before the combine, a week or two after the Super Bowl. I looked at the physical traits. I looked at the scheme fit. I looked at the measurements. He's tall. He's a guy that if you have good coaching, you feel like you could morph him into something then, improve some of his liabilities. We saw that at the combine. Did not look the best in drills. People talk about how he gets lost in coverage at times. Played at Georgia. So again, he's kind of the opposite of some of these other guys that we just talked about. Coming from Illinois, coming from Maryland, you're talking about the best defense in college football. So it's kind of like these Ohio State quarterbacks, right? Everybody says the same thing about the Ohio State quarterbacks. They got the best line, they got the best weapons, so it's hard to judge them as quarterbacks. Similar to the Georgia defense, when you got the pass rush, the defensive line, all the help you got with that unit, it's kind of hard to judge a guy like Ringo as an individual. Yeah, you could look at his physical metrics and be impressed. And this is how he measured up. He had a 71 overall grade, a 70 passer rating against, only surrendered 1 touchdown. In 545 coverage snaps, he gave up 42 catches for 552 yards. So solid numbers, really good numbers, but not the elite numbers that we've seen from some of these other guys.
And I would say he had a up and down year.
Yeah, that's what everybody said on Ringo. They said the year before he was much better.
So I was on Talkin' Giants, I think with just Bobby, maybe Justin was there, but at the beginning of last season, and we did our like college watch list guys, and Ringo was one of the guys, and we were all excited for him. And then I do this college stuff like throughout the actual college season. I'll pick maybe 2 games per Saturday, and I'll be taking some notes, whatever, while I'm just kicking back. And this isn't super film work, but like if 6 passes against Ringo, that's not good. You know what I mean? And I just started watching a lot more Big Ten than SEC at one point. He's not bad. I just think that there was a lot of expectations, and he had the benefit of a fantastic pass rush to assist him. And, it wasn't a great year. I think he certainly fell, but I think the falling happened long before the combine. I think throughout this whole year, he's just been dipping further and further down the draft. And there's film to back that up. Everything you mentioned, getting lost in coverage, maybe being a little grabby too himself. He didn't shine. And also, he's just not a big production guy. Yeah. It's not like he's racking up tons of picks.
Sounds like he's trending towards being a day 2 prospect.
I would say that that's possible. But like, again, we're talking about these 8 guys. They could all go in the first round, as a run on a position goes, or if there's a run on a different position, more than we think might just go to day 2. So he's just kind of mixed in the jumble, I would say. He used to be head and shoulders above most of these guys. And then now that we're here in March 2023, he's just in the mix, I would say.
He's in that 6 to 8 range. He's in that fringe first round to mid second round range. That's what it seems like where Ringo's at right now. And
that's kind of how I'm viewing him.
Yeah. Certainly could be a guy we take, though, at 25. I mean, if we like him and there's 4 or 5 corners off the board, certainly a guy we could have our eyes on.
And I wouldn't hate it.
Yeah, I wouldn't hate it either.
He's not terrible or anything.
He's got upside. That's for damn sure. Talking about upside. Now we worry about the size. I think that's the one worry about him because everything else is there in terms of the 40 time, in terms of the arm length, in terms of everything else. When you look at his metrics, were impressive. Really good statistics too, as well. Last year, he had an 87 overall grade, 44.7 passer rating against, 6 interceptions. So we talk about big playability. He's the guy, actually, I think on this list so far that had the most interceptions. Really good overall numbers here. He gave him 284 yards, only 31 receptions all year, the 44 pass rating, the 87 overall grade from PFF, however they do those metrics. So Forbes was, from a production standpoint, was really impressive. The question is, can he be as productive at the NFL level when he's going up against grown men at 166 pounds?
Yeah, and I to be fair, I have not like done full work on him yet. I've watched some stuff, whatever, but I'm not like giving out my 100% I back this opinion yet. But I mean, those are red flag concerns. 166 is really light. I mean, especially when you consider the height. It's not like he's like 5'9", 166, where you're like, oh, yeah, I get it.
One, or whatever it was.
Exactly. Yeah. And you look at him, like I said, like you don't even need to read the numbers. You could look at him and be like, whatever the college says he weighs is bullshit. He's way lighter than that.
It's like when you saw that they said Kyler Murray was 5'10" and a half. You're like, no, he's like 5'6".
Oh,
it's like,
yeah, it is exactly like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say even Bryce Young, right? Isn't he listed at 6 foot at Alabama and he's like 5'9.5" or something like that?
I don't even think he's that tall, if I'm being honest. But yeah, I think he was listed at 5'10" at the combine. I don't even think he's 5'10". I think he's like 5'8", 5'9".
Yeah. For me, he's got all the things. You described it best, right? Like when you're taking a guy in the 3rd round with Cordell Flott, like you have all of the traits that you can develop, right? But you have your concerns as well. Those splash plays, I mean, they're kind of mixed into a generally bad Mississippi State year, team, etc. I just don't know how to take like the splash plays in context of like bring it to the NFL level. I don't know if those are legit ball skills or they're just like happenstance of a cupcake match. You know what I mean? Where it's just like, we can just kind of go easy. Now it's the 3rd quarter. We're up by 2.
Yeah, maybe they got their second stringer in there because they're getting blown out. Yeah, that's why it's hard to go just based off stats.
Yeah, and I'll probably have a longer breakdown on him in like maybe like 2-3 weeks, something like that. But right now, he's not jumping off the page to me as somebody I am running to the podium for in any capacity. I understand why he's like super high on the list versus Cordell Flott, whatever. But I don't want to, I don't know about you, but when it comes to the 1st round of the draft, I don't want to be building anything.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
I just don't.
I want this guy to be. I don't expect whoever we draft. I don't expect to come in and be a great player day one, but I expect him to come in and at least be semi-productive at the corner position. I want to be able to throw him out there and not worry about him just being a complete liability in coverage week 1. Yeah, I agree with that, and I would worry about it with him at 166.
And I know there are going to be Giants fans that are like, well, we took JPP in 2010 in the 1st round, and he was, a project, whatever. It's like, yes, 2010. They're not too far removed from winning a Super Bowl. They're reloading, not rebuilding, I think was a Jerry Reese quote at one point.
Yeah.
We're not there right now. I'm not risking shit in 1st round. Sorry. Yeah. I'm just not doing it.
No, I'm with you. I listen, if they take him, they take him, but he's probably near the bottom of my list just based off of his size alone for me as in terms of a 1st round prospect.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Next up, we're going to go with guy you seem to like, and he's a little bit low on some people's boards. That's Tyreek Stevenson. You were telling me before we started the video that you saw him at the Senior Bowl, came across as such like a very tough individual. I'm really curious to get your take further on him. These were his numbers well at Miami at a 76 grade. 3 touchdowns given up. He had 2 interceptions, 78 passer grade, 350 yards through the air, only 17 receptions on the year, was only targeted 40 times. What's crazy to me, though, when you look at that, only 17 receptions, gave up 353 yards. That's over 20 yards a catch. That's give us some big plays there.
Yeah, and I'm not in love with Tyreek Stevenson, but he was somebody I didn't really have on my radar for a day one guy until I was at the Senior Bowl. So the Senior Bowl was actually chock full of wide receiver talent, right? Like people were real excited to see Rashee Rice. I was real excited to see Tank Dell. There were a number of other guys that were just fun to watch that,
And we're going to talk about a lot of these guys on our next video. I'm
sure,
excited.
yeah. And the wide receivers had a tough time against all the corners that were down there. That first day, they kind of played a little differently from day to day. And there's 3 days of practice, right? So the first day, they were letting them get real grabby, and they were pressing them right at the line, and all of the receivers had trouble except Tank Dell. All of them. The second day, they were a little less press at the line, but they were still frustrating all along the route. And still, these guys had a lot of trouble. And now Tariq Stevenson didn't practice the third day, but we noticed because we were really, really close. And I don't want to say anything that's not true because none of this is official, but it was pretty clear that he had some lower body thing that was frustrating him every rep. One leg, not sure, knee, ankle, hammy, calf, could be anything. I'm not really sure.
Cramping,
but he was
perhaps.
Yeah, he was talking to somebody that he knows and trusts in the audience. Somebody told me he was an agent. Don't know if that's true. Whatever. But they were talking in between everything, and he was still every rep winning. Every single rep. He continued to practice even though he didn't feel good. He never left, and he continued to win. Just as a press man guy, he loves to get hands on guys. He's got the speed to make up stuff. He had some really, really nice highlight plays even when he was hurt. He shot right up my board into like first round conversation after the week I spent in Mobile.
Wow. Interesting. So keep your eye out on him. Next up, we're going to go with is the final corner on our list, and that's Cam Smith out of South Carolina. I don't remember his size off the top of my head. I think he had decent size, if I recall. I think he was around the 6 foot mark. These are his numbers, though. By far, the least, I guess, not the best. Let's put it that way. 71 pass rating against, had a 65 overall grade, 211 yards on 18 receptions, 302 coverage snaps. I wouldn't say they're bad. Just in comparison to a lot of these other corners on this list, it's not the best in terms of production from Cam Smith out of South Carolina.
Nah, and I'm not in love with him as a prospect either. I think he's more of a day two guy myself. I think also media hype, whatever. We see this every year, right? With like the draft, there's like a general picture of what we think the first round is going to be, and it's never right.
Yeah.
Right. Like I think that there are so many good corners that are first round worthy this year that more and more are just being lumped in with that group because they're somewhat comparable. This guy, to me, he's not a round one guy. I would say he's not even a giant. We were discussing before this that there are some rumors about his work ethic, things like that. If that doesn't scream DeAndre Baker to Giants fans, it should. You couple rumors like that with average measurables, with average film work, average production. And to me, I'm not.
You got DeAndre Baker.
I'm not doing round one average. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, that speaks to why you are trying to get as flexible as possible in the draft. So that corner need, we talked about that being like a big need or whatever. But if this is the only guy on the list, I'll take a center. I'll take a wide receiver. I don't need this with my 25th pick. I think you can get something comparable on day two.
What if he's there at 57 and we don't take a corner?
Sure.
Yeah.
57. Yeah, I would say that's probably, I think you can develop a lot of the things. None of that production is horrible. None of the measurables are horrible.
Yeah.
So it's.
And when you look at his measurables, I was just looking at it as you were talking, he might have had the most impressive out of the guys on the list. I mean, consistent across the board, 4.43, 149 on the 10, 38 on the vert, 11.2 on the broad. Like, that's like you said at the top when we were going over it. That's approaching Jalen Ramsey production at the combine.
With the testing, yeah, absolutely. And
yeah.
So I guess my concern is, and this is the hardest part for me, is, and we were talking about this too, is like one of the most important things at the combine is probably the interviews. And we as fans have no access to their answers. And we only get rumors on how they did or whatever. And remember last year, there was like questions about Kayvon's interviews, right? And how well he interviewed. And he even said the Giants gave me some shit. They asked me, how I'm going to handle the media blowing up that I don't have a ton of sacks by halfway through the year. Things like that. When I hear work ethic issues and I see natural athleticism, that to me is a marriage made in hell. Because that sounds like I'm relying on what I know I can do. But what you know you can do does not always – you don't know what you can do at the NFL level. You only know what you can do among your peers right now.
Yeah.
So that it's sketchy. It's a little sketchy. I think they really have to do their homework on him as a person if they're going to consider him.
Yeah, and that does not sound like the type of prospect that Joe Shane will take. Joe
No,
Shane
it doesn't.
consistently talks about how he's all about character, he's all about work ethic, strong, tough, dependable. I doubt he leans that way, but we'll see. I can't wait though to cover the rest of the draft with you. We'll pick out a day, probably in a couple of days, whenever you're free. We'll pound out the wide receivers. I'll probably release this tomorrow. I think people are gonna like it. It's long in length, but we had a really good. I think we had a really good conversation. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed it. Whoever stuck around for the full hour and 5 minutes. I thought it was a great conversation. Really looking forward to jumping into the wide receivers. Maybe not quite as long of a list for the receivers for day one, guys, but probably at least 5 or 6 of them. So we'll have a good show as well. Maybe a little bit shorter in length, but definitely have a lot to talk about at the wide receiver position. And then we'll dive into some centers. Maybe we'll just do an individual video on some centers because I know there's a lot of day 2 guys there. And that's clearly a big need for the Giants. And really looking forward to doing this draft series with you, Grump, man. Thanks so much for popping on.
I really appreciate you having me. The draft is my favorite thing. It's fun to wonder, and it's fun to draw out different scenarios and stuff like that. So I love doing this stuff, and I appreciate everybody for if you are listening to me say this after an hour and 5 minutes, then you are a champion, and I appreciate you.
Go follow the Grump, by the way. I'll post his link in the video. But
thank you.
You'll see him on the channel a lot more lead up into the draft. Maybe we'll even do a couple of live streams together as we do more and more of these draft videos.
Hell together. Yeah. I'm down for whatever, man.
But hope you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys picked up on a couple of things you didn't know about some of these prospects. As always, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.